A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Silver Chains. The scent of burning sage and fear clung to the stone walls of Rosehaven Castle like a curse that would never lift. Lady Freya pressed her face against the cold window of her chamber, watching the courtyard below fill with noble families arriving for the harvest moon ceremony. Their banners fluttered in the autumn wind, each one representing a house that still held power, still commanded respect. Unlike hers, 7 years had passed since that terrible night when her mother's screams echoed through these very halls. 7 years since Lady Morwen of Rosehaven had been dragged from her bed, accused of practicing the forbidden arts of the moon blessed. 7 years since she had burned in the courtyard below, her silver wolf form writhing in flames that seemed to consume more than just flesh. Freya closed her eyes, but the memory remained burned into her soul like a brand. Her mother's final words, spoken in the ancient tongue as the fire consumed her: "Your wolf sleeps, my daughter, until love awakens what fear has buried." Since that night, Freya had been nothing more than a walking ghost. No wolf had ever stirred within her. No shift had ever come, no matter how desperate her attempts. The healers whispered that grief had broken something fundamental inside her, that she was cursed to walk between worlds, belonging to neither human nor wolf. The court called her the Wolfless Lady, a title that stung more than any blade. Freya, the sharp voice of her stepmother, cut through her dark thoughts like a whip. Lady Beatrice Rosehaven stood in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back severely, her cold eyes taking in Freya's simple dress with obvious disapproval. "You cannot attend the ceremony looking like a scullery maid. Perhaps it would be better if I did not attend at all," Freya replied quietly, not turning from the window. "No alpha will want a wolfless mate." Beatrice's laugh was harsh and mirthless. "Want you? Child, this is not about want. This is about survival." She moved closer, her heels clicking against the stone floor like the countdown to an execution. "Your father's debts to Lord Cedric grow heavier with each passing moon. The silver mines have yielded nothing for months, and our stores dwindle. Lord Cedric has offered a solution." The words hit Freya like a physical blow. She turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach like poison. "What solution?" "He will forgive all debts in exchange for your hand in marriage." Beatrice's smile was sharp as a blade. "You should be grateful. Few men would take on a defective wolf, even for the sake of canceling a debt." Freya's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Lord Cedric Ashford was a brutal man, known for his cruelty and his wandering hands. His first 2 wives had died under mysterious circumstances, both supposedly from accidents that left their bodies broken and bruised. The very thought of belonging to him made her skin crawl. "I will not marry that monster," she whispered. "You will do as your family requires," Beatrice snapped. "Your father has already given his consent. The betrothal will be announced tonight at the ceremony." Before Freya could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Lord Godfrey Rosehaven appeared in the doorway, his once proud frame now stooped with defeat. The battle that had cost him his wolf had left more than physical scars. His spirit had been broken along with his body, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man who had once ruled these lands with wisdom and strength. "Is it done, my lord?" Beatrice asked, her voice sweet as honey laced with poison. Godfrey nodded slowly, not meeting his daughter's eyes. "Lord Cedric awaits your answer tonight, daughter. He has been most generous with his terms." "Generous?" Freya's voice cracked like a whip. "He threatens to destroy our house unless I become his 3rd wife. How many more will there be before someone stops him?" "Enough!" Godfrey's voice carried an echo of his former authority. "We have no choice. Without this alliance, Rosehaven falls. Would you see our people cast out into the wilderness? Would you condemn our servants to starvation?" The weight of responsibility settled on Freya's shoulders like lead chains. She had always known this day might come, but knowing and accepting were 2 different things entirely. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, speaking of strength and courage, of wolves who chose their own destiny. But what destiny could await a wolfless woman in a world ruled by predators? The great hall of Rosehaven Castle had been transformed for the ceremony. Tapestries bearing the ancient symbols of the wolf clans hung from the stone walls, and hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the assembled nobles. The air thrummed with barely contained power, as alphas from across the realm mingled with eligible females, their wolves scenting for potential mates. Freya stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling like an intruder in her own home. Her dress, a deep blue silk that had once belonged to her mother, felt like a costume she was wearing for a play she had never auditioned for. Around her, conversations flowed like wine, but she caught the whispered comments, the pitying glances, the way conversations died when she approached. Poor girl. Such a shame about her condition. Heard she's never shifted, not even once. Lord Cedric must be desperate indeed to consider such a match. Each word was like a needle piercing her heart, but she kept her chin high, her expression serene. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. The ceremony began as the moon reached its peak overhead. One by one, alphas stepped forward to claim their chosen mates, the ancient words of bonding echoing through the hall like a sacred song. Freya watched with a mixture of longing and dread, knowing that her own moment was approaching. Then she saw him. He stood in the shadows at the far end of the hall, apart from the other nobles. His clothes were simple, almost rough, marking him as someone of lower station. A traveling scholar, perhaps, or a messenger from a distant court. His dark hair fell across his face, partially obscuring his features. But there was something about his stillness that drew her attention like a moth to flame. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Golden eyes, ancient and knowing, stared back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something stir deep within her chest, something that had been sleeping for 7 long years. Then Lord Cedric's voice boomed across the hall, shattering the moment like glass. "Lords and ladies, I claim the Lady Freya of Rosehaven as my intended mate." The crowd turned to stare at her, some with pity, others with cruel amusement. Lord Cedric strode forward, his red hair gleaming in the candlelight, his pale eyes fixed on her like a predator stalking prey. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with hands that looked like they could break bones without effort. "Come, my lady," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. "Let us make this official." Freya's feet felt rooted to the stone floor. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but walk toward this man who would own her body and soul. But the weight of her family's debt, the desperate faces of her father's people, held her as surely as iron chains. She took one step forward, then another. Lord Cedric's smile grew wider, more predatory. Behind him, she could see her stepmother nodding approvingly, her father's face carved from stone. Then, like a vision from a fever dream, she saw something that made her stumble, a flash of movement in her peripheral vision, the mysterious stranger stepping forward from the shadows. Their eyes met again, and this time the stirring in her chest became a roar. Without conscious thought, without plan or purpose, Freya changed course. Her feet carried her not toward Lord Cedric and his cruel smile, but toward the man in simple clothes who watched her with eyes like molten gold. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs as she approached him. Up close, she could see the strong line of his jaw, the way his simple clothes could not quite hide the powerful frame beneath. His scent hit her like a physical force, pine and steel, and something wild that made her head spin. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying an undertone of command that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. "Something that feels right," she whispered, and before her courage could fail her, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was electric, sending fire through her veins and awakening something that had been dormant for so long she had forgotten it existed. Around them, the hall exploded into chaos, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heart and the low growl that rumbled in his chest. When they finally broke apart, the damage was done. Lord Cedric's face was purple with rage. The assembled nobles were shouting their shock and outrage, and Freya had just thrown away any chance of a respectable marriage. But for the first time in 7 years, she felt truly alive. Chapter 2. Golden Fire. The silence that followed their kiss stretched like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. Freya could feel the weight of every stare in the great hall, the shock and horror radiating from the assembled nobles like heat from a forge. But none of that mattered as much as the way the stranger's golden eyes were studying her face, as if he were seeing something that no one else could. "How dare you?" Lord Cedric's voice exploded across the hall like thunder, shattering the spell that had fallen over them. His face was mottled with rage, his pale eyes wild with fury. "You dare to touch what belongs to me?" The stranger's expression shifted, becoming dangerous in a way that made the hair on Freya's arms stand on end. When he spoke, his voice carried an undertone of authority that seemed to resonate in her very bones. "She belongs to no one but herself," he said quietly. But somehow every person in the hall heard him clearly. "And she chose to kiss me." Lord Cedric's hand moved to the sword at his hip, but something in the stranger's stillness made him hesitate. Around them, lesser nobles were backing away, their wolves sensing a power that their human minds couldn't quite comprehend. "Willem," the stranger said, extending his hand to Freya. "My name is Willem." She took his offered hand without hesitation, gasping at the jolt of electricity that raced up her arm at the contact. His skin was warm, calloused from work with weapons, and there was something about his touch that made her feel safer than she had in years. "Come," he murmured, his thumb tracing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent shivers down her spine. "We should leave before Lord Cedric finds his courage." He led her through the crowd of stunned nobles, who parted before them like wheat before a scythe. Freya could hear her stepmother's shrill voice calling after them, her father's weaker protests, but Willem's presence beside her made it all seem distant and unimportant. They slipped through a side door that led to one of the castle's smaller courtyards. The night air was crisp and clean, scented with autumn leaves and the promise of winter. Above them, the harvest moon cast everything in silver light, making the stones beneath their feet gleam like polished metal. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Willem said, finally releasing her hand. Immediately, she missed the warmth of his touch. "Probably both," Freya admitted, wrapping her arms around herself as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. "I have just destroyed any chance of saving my family's lands." "Have you?" His voice held a note of something that might have been amusement. "Tell me about this debt to Lord Cedric." There was something in the way he asked the question that made her look at him more closely. In the moonlight, she could see that his simple clothes were well made, the fabric finer than it had appeared in the shadows of the great hall. His posture spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and there was an alertness in his eyes that reminded her of a predator watching its prey. "Who are you?" she asked, instead of answering his question. "You are not what you appear to be." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "None of us are, my lady. But you asked me a question with your kiss, and I find myself curious about the answer." "What question?" "Whether I would choose you over my duty." His golden eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight. "It appears I already have." Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of heavy boots on stone announced that they were no longer alone. Lord Cedric appeared in the courtyard entrance, flanked by 4 of his men-at-arms. His sword was drawn, the blade gleaming with deadly intent. "Step away from my betrothed, stranger," Cedric snarled. "This farce has gone on long enough." Willem moved in front of Freya with fluid grace, his hand moving to rest on the pommel of a sword she hadn't noticed he carried. "You're betrothed?" "Strange. I heard no words of acceptance from the lady." "Her father has given consent. That is all the law requires." Cedric's smile was cruel and predatory. "Though perhaps after I finish with you, she will be more amenable to reason." The threat hung in the air like poison. But Willem's response was calm, almost conversational. "I think not." What happened next defied everything Freya thought she knew about combat. Willem's sword cleared its scabbard in a movement too fast for her eyes to follow. And suddenly, 2 of Cedric's men were on the ground, clutching wounds that bled freely but were not fatal. The other 2 had stumbled backward, their own blades barely half-drawn. But it wasn't the speed of his sword work that made Freya's breath catch in her throat. It was the way the very air around Willem seemed to thicken with power, the way the moonlight seemed to bend toward him like he was drawing it into himself. For just a moment, his human facade slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something vast and wild and infinitely dangerous. Lord Cedric's face had gone pale, his own sword trembling in his grip. "What are you?" he whispered. "Someone you do not wish to cross," Willem replied, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made even Freya want to drop to her knees. Leave, now, and do not return. For a moment, it seemed as though Cedric might press the fight. His pale eyes darted between Willem and Freya, calculating odds and measuring risks. But whatever he saw in the stranger's golden gaze made his courage fail. With a curse that would have made a tavern wench blush, he sheathed his sword and gestured for his remaining men to help their wounded companions. "This is not over," he snarled as they retreated. "The debt remains, and I will have what was promised to me." Willem watched them go with the patience of a cat watching mice, only relaxing when they had disappeared into the shadows. When he turned back to Freya, his expression had gentled, but she could still see the echo of that terrible power in his eyes. "You are not a traveling scholar," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he admitted. "I am not." "Then what are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. When he spoke, his words were carefully chosen. "I am someone who has been watching corrupt lords prey upon innocent families for far too long. Someone who believes that debts gained through extortion and threat should not be honored. You speak as if you have authority to make such judgments. Perhaps I do." His smile was enigmatic, holding secrets she couldn't begin to guess at. "Tell me, Lady Freya, what would you do if you were free of Lord Cedric's threats? If your family's debts were forgiven and your lands restored?" The question caught her off guard. She had spent so many years focused on survival, on simply making it through each day, that she had stopped dreaming of anything beyond mere existence. I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I have never allowed myself to imagine such a thing." "Then perhaps it is time you started." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Your wolf is not gone, Freya. I can sense her, sleeping deep within you. She is simply waiting for the right moment to emerge. How could you possibly know that? I have been examined by every healer in the realm. They all say the same thing, because I know what it is to carry power that others cannot understand." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Because the moment you kissed me, I felt her stir. She recognizes something in me, just as my wolf recognizes something in her." The words should have sounded like madness, but there was something in his touch, something in the way her body responded to his nearness, that made her want to believe. For the first time in 7 years, she felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "What are you suggesting?" she whispered. "Come with me," he said simply. "Let me show you what you truly are." The offer hung between them like a bridge over a chasm. On one side lay everything she had ever known, the familiar weight of duty and despair. On the other lay the unknown, dangerous, and full of possibility. Behind them, she could hear voices calling her name, her family and their guests searching for the wayward daughter who had disrupted their carefully laid plans. Soon they would find this courtyard, and then there would be no escape from the consequences of her actions. "Where would we go?" she asked. Willem's smile was full of promise and peril. "Somewhere safe, somewhere you can learn to trust your instincts again." Freya looked back toward the castle that had been both her home and her prison for 21 years. Then she looked at this mysterious stranger who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to speak. "Lead the way," she said, and took his offered hand. Chapter 3. Ancient Sanctuary. The forest beyond Rosehaven's walls was darker than Freya remembered, the ancient oaks and pines forming a canopy so thick that even the harvest moon's light struggled to penetrate it. Willem moved through the undergrowth, with the silent confidence of someone who knew these woods intimately, his hand warm and steady in hers, as he guided her along paths she had never seen before. They had been walking for over an hour when the attack came without warning. The first she knew of danger was Willem's sudden stillness, his hand tightening on hers as his head tilted to listen to something she couldn't hear. "Run," he whispered, his voice carrying an urgency that made her blood freeze. "When I tell you, run toward those rocks and do not look back." "Willem, what?" The howl that split the night air was unlike anything in nature, a sound of pure malice that spoke of wolves corrupted by dark magic. Through the trees came Lord Cedric's hunting party, But these were not the men who had faced them in the courtyard. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and their partially shifted forms moved with predatory grace that spoke of enhancement beyond normal wolf abilities. "Dark sorcery," Willem growled, his own form beginning to blur and shift. "Cedric has made bargains with forces he does not understand." What happened next shattered every assumption Freya had ever held about the nature of power. Willem's transformation was not the gradual shift she had seen in other wolves, but an explosion of raw force that seemed to tear reality itself. Where the man had stood, a massive black wolf now crouched, easily twice the size of any normal shifter. His golden eyes burned like twin suns, and the air around him crackled with an energy that made her teeth ache. But it was not just Willem's wolf that responded to the threat. Deep within Freya's chest, something that had been sleeping for 7 long years suddenly stirred. Pain lanced through her body as bones began to shift and reshape, as muscles stretched and reformed. She fell to her knees, gasping as her first transformation in years began to take hold. "No," she whispered, fighting against the change. "I cannot. I do not know how." Willem's wolf turned to look at her, and in those golden depths, she saw not just animal intelligence, but something far older and more complex. His mental voice touched her mind with surprising gentleness. "Do not fight her," he said, speaking directly into her thoughts. "Your wolf has been waiting for this moment. Trust her." The corrupted wolves were almost upon them now, their red eyes fixed on Freya with a hunger that had nothing to do with ordinary predation. They could sense what she was becoming, could smell the power that was awakening within her bloodline. With a cry that was half human, half wolf, Freya completed her transformation. The wolf that emerged was unlike anything the forest had ever seen. Her fur was silver white as moonlight, marked with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Her eyes blazed with the same golden fire as Willem's, but hers carried an additional quality that spoke of ancient magic and forgotten bloodlines. She was moon-blessed, the first of her kind to walk the earth in over a century. The corrupted wolves faltered as they caught her scent, their red eyes widening with something that might have been fear. But their dark enhancement drove them forward despite their instincts, and the battle was joined with savage intensity. Willem fought like a force of nature unleashed, his massive jaws crushing bone and tearing flesh with ruthless efficiency. But it was Freya who proved to be the greater surprise. Her moon-blessed abilities manifested in ways that defied conventional understanding of wolf magic, her very presence seeming to cleanse the corruption from their enemies. Where her claws struck, the unnatural red glow faded from their victims' eyes, leaving behind confused and terrified men who fled into the darkness. When the last of the corrupted wolves had either fled or fallen, Willem shifted back to human form. His clothes were torn and bloodied, but his golden eyes held a satisfaction that spoke of battles long awaited. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have never seen power like yours." Freya's own shift back to human form was less graceful, leaving her naked and shivering in the forest undergrowth. Willem immediately shrugged out of his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders, the gesture protective and oddly intimate. "I do not understand," she whispered, her voice shaking with exhaustion and confusion. "What am I?" "You are exactly what your mother was," Willem replied, settling beside her on a fallen log. "Moon-blessed, a bloodline that traces back to the first wolves blessed by the goddess herself. Your abilities can cleanse corruption, heal the wounded, and inspire loyalty in even the most jaded hearts. If that is true, then why was my mother burned as a witch? Why has my wolf been sleeping all these years?" Willem's expression darkened. "Because there are those who fear what you represent. Your mother's death was not the work of fearful villagers, Freya. It was assassination, carefully planned and executed by those who knew exactly what she was." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She had always suspected that her mother's death had been more than simple superstition, but to hear it confirmed was like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. "Who?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Lord Cedric serves masters who have been working for generations to eliminate the moon-blessed bloodline. They fear what would happen if someone like you were to take their rightful place in the natural order of our world. Their rightful place? Willem was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying her face in the filtered moonlight. When he spoke, his words carried a weight that made her suspect she was hearing only part of a much larger truth. The moon-blessed were never meant to be subjects, Freya. They were meant to be queens. Before she could ask what he meant by that, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest. Willem rose smoothly to his feet, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. But then he relaxed as familiar scents reached his sensitive nose. "It is all right," he said, though Freya noticed he did not move away from her. "These are allies." A dozen riders emerged from the darkness, their horses moving with the disciplined precision of a military unit. They wore simple traveling clothes, but Freya's newly awakened senses could detect the careful deference in their posture as they approached Willem. "My lord," the lead rider said, dismounting and dropping to one knee. "We came as quickly as we could when we sensed the corruption in these woods." "Rise, Marcus," Willem replied, his voice carrying a tone of command that seemed entirely natural. "The threat has been dealt with, but we must move quickly. Lord Cedric will not be content to let this matter rest." As the riders prepared to escort them to safety, Freya found herself studying Willem with new eyes. The way the men deferred to him, the casual authority in his voice, the fact that they had addressed him as "my lord," despite his simple attire, all pointed to a truth she was only beginning to suspect. "You are not just someone investigating corrupt nobles," she said quietly as he helped her onto one of the horses. "No," he admitted, swinging up behind her with fluid grace. "I am not. Then who are you, really?" Willem's arms tightened around her as they began to ride deeper into the forest, following paths that seemed to exist only for those who knew the ancient secrets of the land. "I am someone who has been waiting his entire life to find you," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "And now that I have, I will never let you go." The promise in his words sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. As they rode through the darkness toward whatever sanctuary awaited them, Freya found herself wondering if she was fleeing from one form of captivity, only to find herself bound by something far more dangerous. But when Willem's arms tightened protectively around her, when his wolf's contentment echoed through the bond that was growing stronger between them with each passing moment, she found that she no longer cared about the wisdom of her choices. For the first time in 7 years, she felt truly alive. And if that meant placing her trust in a man whose secrets ran deeper than the ancient forest around them, then perhaps it was a risk worth taking. The Moon-Blessed had always been meant for extraordinary destinies, after all. Chapter 4. Crown of Shadows. The sanctuary Willem brought her to was unlike anything Freya had ever imagined. Hidden deep within the ancient forest, protected by wards so old their origins had been forgotten, stood a fortress that seemed to have grown from the living rock itself. Towers spiraled toward the sky like reaching fingers, their walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Welcome to Shadowmere," Willem said as they passed through gates that opened at their approach without any visible mechanism. "One of the oldest strongholds in the realm, and the safest place for someone of your bloodline." The courtyard beyond was filled with activity despite the late hour. Men and women moved with purposeful efficiency, their clothes marking them as everything from nobles to common soldiers, but all bearing themselves with the confident bearing of those who served a powerful master. What struck Freya most forcefully was the way they looked at Willem, the immediate deference and respect that spoke of genuine loyalty rather than mere fear. "My lord," a woman approached, her graying hair pulled back severely, but her eyes warm with obvious affection. "Your chambers have been prepared, and the Lady Freya's as well. Cook has prepared a meal, knowing you would both be hungry after your journey." "Thank you, Helena," Willem replied, his tone gentler than Freya had yet heard it. "See that we are not disturbed tonight. Tomorrow we will have much to discuss." As Helena bustled away, Freya found herself studying Willem's profile in the torchlight. The easy authority, the obvious affection of his people, the way he seemed to belong in this place of power and ancient magic, all pointed to conclusions she was still afraid to voice. "Who are you really?" she asked for the third time since they had met, though now the question carried different weight entirely. Willem was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. When he spoke, His words carried the weight of a confession that had been years in the making. "I am High King Alaric Draven," he said simply, "sovereign of all the wolf packs in this realm, and the man who has been searching for his destined mate for the past 10 years. The revelation should have sent her to her knees in shock and terror. Instead, Freya found herself studying his face, looking for signs of deception and finding none. Somehow, in the deepest part of her soul, she had already known. "The High King," she repeated, her voice strangely calm. "The man they call the Iron Wolf, the conqueror of the Northern Territories. Among other things, yes." His mouth curved in a smile that held no humor, though I suspect those titles were earned through necessity rather than choice. "And you have been investigating Lord Cedric under false pretenses?" "I have been investigating corruption throughout my realm, yes. Lord Cedric is merely one of many who have forgotten that their power comes not from their own strength, but from the consent of those they rule." His golden eyes met hers, and she saw something vulnerable there, something almost desperate. "But that is not why I came to Rosehaven." "Then why?" "Because 3 months ago, my court seer had a vision. She saw a woman with silver hair and golden eyes, a moon-blessed who would either save our people or watch them burn. She saw her trapped in a castle made of obligations and lies, slowly dying as her true nature was suppressed." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "She saw me finding her just as she chose death over dishonor." The words hit her like physical blows, each one resonating with a truth she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Before Willem's appearance, she had been spiraling toward despair, the weight of her family's expectations and her own perceived failures slowly crushing her spirit. "You came to Rosehaven to find me," she whispered. "I came to Rosehaven to court you properly, to give you time to know me before revealing my true identity." His laugh was bitter. "I had planned months of careful courtship, of earning your trust and affection before burdening you with the knowledge of what our bond would mean." "Our bond?" Instead of answering with words, Willem stepped closer, his presence wrapping around her like a physical force. This close, she could feel the pull between them, the way her wolf sang in harmony with his, the way her very soul seemed to recognize him as its missing piece. "You feel it too," he said, and it wasn't a question. "The certainty that we belong together, that we always have. From the moment our eyes met across that hall, you knew." She did know, and the knowledge terrified her more than Lord Cedric's threats ever had. This was not simply attraction or even love, though she suspected both were present. This was destiny itself, the universe reshaping itself around their connection. "I am nobody," she whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her since childhood. "A wolfless woman from a minor house with no dowry and no prospects. What could I possibly offer a king?" Willem's eyes blazed with sudden fierce intensity. "You are moon-blessed, the first in over a century. Your bloodline traces back to the original wolves blessed by the goddess herself. You have power that could heal the rifts that have torn our people apart for generations." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "But even if you were truly nobody, even if you had no magic and no noble blood, I would still choose you. My wolf chose you. My soul chose you, and I have learned to trust those instincts above all else." The intensity in his voice, the raw honesty of his words, broke through the last of her defenses. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was nothing like their first desperate embrace in the great hall. This was a claiming, a promise, a surrender to forces greater than either of them alone. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their wolves pressing close to the surface with barely restrained need. "There is something else you must know," Willem said, his voice rough with desire and something that might have been regret. "The political situation in the realm is complicated. There are those who would see a moon-blessed queen as a threat to their own power." "What do you mean?" 3 weeks from now, under the next full moon, I am expected to announce my betrothal to Lady Evangeline Blackwater, daughter of the most powerful lord in the Eastern Territories. It is a political alliance that my advisors believe essential for maintaining peace." The words hit her like ice water, washing away the warmth of their kiss and leaving behind a chill that seemed to penetrate to her very bones. "You are promised to another," she said, stepping back from him. "I am expected to marry for political advantage, yes, but I have made no promises, spoken no vows." His golden eyes held hers with desperate intensity. "The moment I scented you, the moment our wolves recognized each other, any possibility of that marriage died. Your advisors will not see it that way. My advisors serve at my pleasure, not the other way around." The authority in his voice was absolute, the power of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I am High King by right of conquest and strength. If I choose to take a moon-blessed mate, then that is what will happen." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but Freya had lived her entire life in the shadow of political necessity. She knew how such calculations worked, how personal desires were weighed against the good of the many. And if choosing me means civil war? If the Eastern lords rebel rather than accept a nobody as their queen? Willem's smile was sharp as a blade, carrying echoes of the conqueror he was reputed to be. "Then they will learn why I am called the Iron Wolf. I have built this realm with sword and claw, and I will defend it the same way if necessary. You would go to war for me? I would burn the world for you," he said simply. And she believed him completely. The confession should have thrilled her, but instead it filled her with a terror she couldn't name. To be loved with such intensity, to be the center of such overwhelming devotion, felt like standing in the path of an avalanche. "I need time," she whispered, backing toward the door Helena had indicated led to her chambers. "This is all too much, too fast." Pain flickered across Willem's features, but he nodded slowly. "Of course. You have had enough shocks for one night." He stepped aside, giving her a clear path to escape. "But Freya, know that running from this, from us, will not make it any less real." As she fled toward the sanctuary of her assigned chambers, Freya could feel the truth of his words settling into her bones like a curse. The mate bond was not something that could be denied or ignored, and trying to do so would only bring pain to them both. But the alternative, accepting her place as queen beside the most powerful man in the realm, felt equally impossible. She was nobody, a woman who had spent her entire adult life believing herself broken and worthless. How could she possibly be what he needed, what the kingdom needed? In her chambers, surrounded by luxury that spoke of a king's regard, Freya finally allowed herself to weep for the simple life she had never wanted, but was now lost to her forever. Outside her window, the moon-blessed wolf within her soul howled in harmony with its mate, calling across the darkness with a song of longing that would not be denied. Chapter 5. Shattered Mirrors. 3 days of sanctuary at Shadowmere had done nothing to quiet the storm raging within Freya's heart. She had spent the time learning to control her newly awakened moon-blessed abilities, training with Alaric in the ancient courtyards where generations of royal wolves had honed their skills. Each moment in his presence only strengthened the bond between them, the pull becoming so intense that even being in separate rooms felt like physical pain. But it was the arrival of the messenger that shattered their fragile peace like glass against stone. Freya was in the gardens, practicing the art of channeling moonlight into healing energy, when the thunderous beating of hooves announced an urgent arrival. She looked up to see a rider racing through the gates, his horse lathered with sweat and foam, his face grim with the weight of desperate news. "My king!" the messenger called out, sliding from his mount before it had fully stopped. "Urgent word from the capital!" Alaric emerged from the great hall, with the fluid grace that never failed to make her heart skip, but his expression had hardened into the mask of command she had learned to recognize. This was not Willem the Wanderer, but the High King in all his terrible authority. "Speak," he commanded, his voice carrying the alpha power that made lesser wolves drop to their knees in submission. The messenger's words fell like hammer blows in the suddenly silent courtyard. "Lord Theron Blackwater rides with 500 men, sire. He claims you have dishonored his daughter by failing to appear for the betrothal ceremony. He demands satisfaction, or threatens to withdraw the eastern territories from your rule." Freya's blood turned to ice. She had known this moment would come, but somehow she had allowed herself to believe they would have more time, that somehow love would prove stronger than political necessity. "And Lord Cedric?" Alaric's voice was dangerously quiet. "Rides with him, sire. along with several other lords who claim you have grown weak, that you prioritize personal desires over the good of the realm. The messenger's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They speak of choosing a new High King, one who understands duty. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the courtyard, Alaric's people had gathered, their faces reflecting the same grim understanding that was settling into Freya's bones. This was not just political posturing. This was the prelude to civil war. "How long do we have?" Alaric asked, his tone betraying nothing of what she could feel through their bond, the rage and frustration burning like acid in his chest. "They will reach the capital within the week, sire. Lord Blackwater has called for a formal gathering of the noble houses to address what he terms your abandonment of royal duty." Alaric nodded slowly, his golden eyes finding Freya's across the courtyard. In that gaze, she saw the weight of impossible choices, the burden of a crown that demanded sacrifices she had never fully understood. "Prepare for departure at first light," he commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "We return to face this challenge." As his people scattered to follow orders, Freya found herself rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The moment she had been dreading had arrived, the moment when Alaric would be forced to choose between his mate and his kingdom, and she already knew which choice duty would demand. "Freya," his voice was gentle as he approached, but she could see the steel underneath, the resolve that had made him a king. "We need to talk." "No," she said, backing away from him, her voice breaking on the word. "I know what you are going to say. I know what you have to do." "You know nothing," he snarled, his careful control finally cracking. "You think I would abandon you? You think I would choose political convenience over my destined mate? I think you are a king first and a man second," she replied, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. "I think you will do what you must to protect your people, even if it destroys us both. Then you think wrong." He reached for her, but she stepped beyond his grasp, putting the stone fountain between them like a barrier. "I told you I would burn the world for you, and I meant every word. And I told you I needed time to think," she shot back. "Time you clearly do not have. Time we do not have," he corrected, his emphasis making her flinch. "This is not my burden alone, Freya. The moment you kissed me in that great hall, you chose to bind your fate to mine. I chose nothing." The words exploded from her, with all the force of 3 days' worth of suppressed fear and confusion. "I acted on impulse, on desperation, on anything but rational thought. I am a nobody, Alaric, a broken woman from a failed house with no training, no preparation for what you are asking of me." "You are moon-blessed," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You are the most powerful wolf born in a century, with abilities that could reshape the very foundations of our world. You are my destined mate, chosen by forces greater than either of us. You are exactly what this kingdom needs." "I am terrified," she whispered, the admission torn from her like a physical wound. "I am terrified of failing you, of failing your people, of being the reason your kingdom tears itself apart." Something in her voice, some note of genuine anguish, seemed to crack the armor of his royal composure. When he spoke again, his words carried the warmth she had come to treasure, the villain who had saved her from a nightmare of her own making. "Do you think I was not terrified when I first took the crown? Do you think any ruler worth the title does not wake each morning wondering if they will make the choice that destroys everything they have worked to build?" He moved around the fountain slowly, giving her time to flee if she chose. "Fear is not weakness, love. Fear is wisdom. It is what keeps us from making choices lightly. Your advisors will never accept me," she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "My advisors serve at my pleasure." His voice carried echoes of the conqueror again, the man who had united fractured territories through force of will and strength of arm. "If they cannot adapt to serve a moon-blessed queen, then they will be replaced by those who can. And if the Eastern Lords rebel, then they will learn why I am called the Iron Wolf." His smile was sharp as winter wind, carrying promises of violence that made her shiver. "I did not unite this realm by yielding to every political threat, Freya. I did it by being stronger than those who opposed me." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but all Freya could think of was the blood that would be spilled, the lives that would be lost, the kingdom that might be torn apart, all because she had been foolish enough to kiss a stranger in a moment of desperation. "This is my fault," she whispered. "All of it. If I had simply accepted Lord Cedric's suit, if I had done my duty to my family, none of this would be happening. If you had accepted Cedric's suit, you would be dead within a year," Alaric replied bluntly. "And I would have spent the rest of my life searching for a mate I would never find, slowly going mad from the loneliness that consumes unmated alphas." The words hit her like physical blows, each one carrying the weight of visions she had seen in her dreams. Glimpses of possible futures where she had chosen differently, where duty had triumphed over desire, where both of them had been slowly destroyed by choices that honored obligation over truth. "What are you asking of me?" she whispered. "I am asking you to trust me," he replied, finally close enough to touch her again. His hands cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I am asking you to believe that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. And if we lose, if your kingdom falls because you chose love over duty, then we will build something new from the ashes," he said simply. "Something founded on truth rather than political convenience, on strength rather than fear." The absolute conviction in his voice was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. This was not a man who made promises lightly. Not a king who spoke of burning worlds, unless he meant every word. "The formal announcement of our betrothal will have to be made publicly," she said slowly, testing the words like someone learning to speak a foreign language, "before all the noble houses, before Lord Blackwater and his daughter. Yes, there will be challenges, both political and personal. Lords who see opportunity in chaos. Wolves who cannot accept a moon-blessed queen. Yes, we could both die before this is over. Your kingdom could be torn apart. Your people could suffer." "Yes," he agreed, but his golden eyes never wavered from hers. "And we could also succeed. We could build something stronger than what came before. Something worthy of the power you carry and the love that binds us." The choice stretched before her like a chasm, with safety and obscurity on one side and terrifying possibility on the other. But as she looked into Alaric's eyes, as she felt the certainty of their bond thrumming through her very soul, Freya realized that there had never really been a choice at all. She was moon-blessed, destined for extraordinary things whether she wanted them or not. She was mated to a king, bound to him by forces older than memory, and she was tired, so very tired, of running from what she was meant to become. "When do we leave for the capital?" she asked, and watched as relief and fierce joy blazed across his features. "At dawn," he replied, pulling her into his arms with desperate intensity. "And Freya, thank you." As she melted into his embrace, breathing in his scent of pine and steel, and something indefinably wild, Freya tried to convince herself that she was making the right choice, but deep in her heart, she could feel the approaching storm, could sense the trials that awaited them both. The Moon-Blessed had always been destined for great things, after all. She had simply never imagined that greatness would come with such a terrible price. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The Great Hall of Drakmore Castle had not seen such an assembly of power in over a generation. Every major house in the realm had sent representatives, their banners creating a tapestry of colored silk that fluttered in the drafts from the massive stone walls. The air thrummed with barely contained tension as alphas and their retinues filled the ancient space, their wolves sensing the approaching storm that would reshape the very foundations of their world. Freya stood in the shadows behind the throne, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the assembled nobility take their places. She wore the deep blue silk gown that Alaric had commissioned for her, its color echoing the royal house while the silver embroidery caught the light like captured moonbeams. Around her throat lay a collar of ancient silver work, the mate mark that proclaimed her status to any with eyes to see. But it was not the finery that made her feel like she was wearing a costume for a play she had never rehearsed. It was the weight of expectations, the knowledge that every word she spoke, every gesture she made, would be dissected and analyzed by people who already saw her as an interloper, a nobody who had seduced their king away from his duty. "Breathe," Alaric murmured from where he stood beside his throne. magnificent in black leather and silver mail, the crown of his ancestors gleaming against his dark hair. Through their bond, she could feel his own tension, the careful control he maintained over the wolf that wanted to claim her publicly before this gathering of potential enemies. "You are exactly where you belong." "I belong in obscurity," she whispered back. But the protest lacked conviction. The past week of traveling to the capital had shown her glimpses of what she might become, the power that stirred within her bloodline responding to the needs of those around her. Villages they had passed through still spoke in wonder of the silver-haired woman who had healed their sick children with a touch, who had blessed their fields with moonlight that promised abundant harvests. "You belong beside me," he replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that had made him a king. "And after today, everyone will know it." The great doors swung open with a boom that echoed through the hall like thunder. Lord Theron Blackwater entered first, his massive frame filling the doorway, his pale eyes scanning the assembled crowd with the calculating gaze of a predator measuring potential prey. Behind him walked Lady Evangeline, beautiful as winter moonlight, and just as cold, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of hours spent preparing for this moment. But it was the third figure that made Freya's breath catch in her throat. Lord Cedric Ashford followed in their wake, his red hair gleaming in the torchlight, his pale eyes fixed on her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. The corruption she had sensed in him during their first encounter had grown stronger, fed by whatever dark bargains he had made to gain the power she could smell rolling off him in waves. "Lord Blackwater," Alaric's voice carried easily through the now silent hall, formal and controlled. "You requested this gathering. State your purpose." Theron stepped forward, his own voice booming with the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "I come to address a matter of honor, Your Majesty. A betrothal agreement that has been cast aside, a daughter who has been dishonored, a kingdom that questions whether their king values duty above personal desire." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles, some nodding in agreement, others watching with the fascination of those witnessing a battle between titans. Freya could feel the currents of political calculation flowing through the crowd, alliances shifting like sand with each spoken word. "I have made no promises that I have not kept," Alaric replied, his tone deceptively mild, but Freya could feel the power gathering around him like a storm preparing to break. "Speak plainly, Lord Blackwater. What do you want?" "I want you to honor the agreement made between our houses," Theron shot back. "I want you to take my daughter as your queen, as was arranged. I want you to remember that personal desires must sometimes be sacrificed for the good of the realm. And if I refuse?" The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Theron's smile was sharp as winter wind, carrying promises of violence that made several of the lesser nobles step back unconsciously. "Then perhaps the realm needs a king who better understands the meaning of duty," he said, his hand moving meaningfully to rest on his sword hilt. The challenge was unmistakable, spoken before witnesses who could carry word of it to every corner of the kingdom. This was not just political maneuvering anymore. This was the prelude to civil war, the moment when words would give way to steel and blood. "I see." Alaric's voice had gone dangerously quiet, carrying undertones that made every wolf in the hall want to bare their throats in submission. "You question my fitness to rule based on my choice of mate. You believe that political convenience should triumph over the bonds forged by the goddess herself. I believe that kings who prioritize their personal desires over the needs of their people become tyrants," Theron replied. But Freya noticed that his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Even he could sense the power gathering around Alaric like a living thing, the alpha authority that had conquered nations and united fractured territories under one crown. "Then let me show you something about the bonds you would have me break," Alaric said, and gestured for Freya to join him. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the point of no return that would either elevate her to heights she had never imagined or destroy them both in flames of political ambition. Taking a deep breath, Freya stepped out of the shadows and into the full view of the assembled nobility. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Gasps echoed through the hall as her moon-blessed heritage became apparent to those with the senses to perceive it. Her silver hair seemed to glow with its own light. Her golden eyes blazed with power that spoke of bloodlines older than memory. and the very air around her shimmered with energies that made the ancient stones of the castle sing in harmonious response. "Behold," Alaric's voice carried to every corner of the hall, "Lady Freya of Rosehaven, last of the moon-blessed bloodline, my destined mate and chosen queen." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Lord Blackwater had gone pale, his political calculations crumbling in the face of a reality he had not anticipated. A moon-blessed queen was not just a political alliance. She was a living symbol of divine favor, a bridge between the mortal world and the ancient powers that had shaped their people's destiny. But it was Lord Cedric who broke the silence, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet like a blade through silk. "Lies," he snarled, stepping forward with his corrupted power crackling around him like dark lightning. "The moon-blessed died out generations ago. This is some witch's trick, some deception meant to blind us to the king's weakness. You dare call me a liar?" Alaric's voice carried the full weight of his alpha power now, making the very stones tremble with barely contained force. But it was Freya who answered, stepping forward to face the man who had haunted her nightmares. "Then let me prove what I am," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall despite its quiet tone. Without hesitation, she began to shift, calling upon the abilities that had awakened under Alaric's guidance. The transformation was nothing like the crude partial shifts she had seen from Cedric's corrupted followers. This was poetry written in flesh and bone, a dance of power and grace that spoke of bloodlines blessed by divine forces. Her silver wolf emerged like moonlight given form, larger than any normal shifter, her fur seeming to capture and reflect the torchlight until she blazed like a star fallen to earth. But it was when Cedric moved to attack, his own corrupted wolf lunging forward with unnatural speed and strength, that the true extent of her abilities became clear. The moment his darkness touched her light, it simply ceased to exist. The corruption that had enhanced his power for so long burned away like mist before the dawn, leaving behind only a confused and terrified man who collapsed to the stone floor. "The moon-blessed cleanses corruption," Alaric's voice explained to the stunned assembly as Freya shifted back to human form, completely unharmed by the encounter. "She heals what has been broken, restores what has been lost, brings light to places where darkness has taken root. Tell me, Lord Blackwater, does this seem like weakness to you?" Theron's face had gone ashen, his political ambitions crumbling as he realized the magnitude of what he was facing. A moon-blessed queen was not just a political inconvenience. She was a force of nature, a living embodiment of powers that could reshape kingdoms and purify bloodlines that had been tainted by generations of compromise and corruption. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Political alliances cannot be cast aside simply because of mystical bloodlines. The Eastern Territories will not accept. The Eastern Territories will accept what their High King decrees." Alaric interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "As will you, Lord Blackwater. The question is whether you will do so as a loyal vassal or as a conquered enemy." The threat hung in the air like a sword poised to fall. Around the hall, Freya could see nobles choosing sides with their eyes, loyalty and ambition warring in expressions that spoke of the chaos to come. But there was also something else, something that gave her hope despite the danger they faced. Wonder, awe, the recognition that they were witnessing something that had not been seen for generations. The return of bloodlines and powers that their ancestors had thought lost forever. "I will not yield," Theron said finally, his hand moving to his sword. "If you choose this path, Alaric, then you choose civil war. Blood will flow, innocents will die, and the realm will burn." "Then so be it," Alaric replied, and Freya could feel through their bond the terrible certainty with which he spoke. "But know this, old friend, when the fighting ends, when the smoke clears and the dead are counted, it will be a moon-blessed queen who sits beside me on the throne, and it will be her children who inherit this realm, children who carry both royal blood and divine blessing." The words were a declaration of war disguised as a prophecy, and everyone in the hall knew it. As Lord Blackwater stalked from the chamber with his daughter and remaining supporters, as the assembled nobles began the whispered conversations that would determine which banners would fly in the battles to come, Freya found herself wondering if love truly was worth the price they were all about to pay. But when Alaric's hand found hers, when she felt the absolute certainty of their bond thrumming through her very soul, she knew that there had never really been another choice. Some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect, and if the goddess had truly blessed her bloodline for this purpose, then perhaps it was time to trust in powers greater than political convenience or personal fear. The moon blessed had returned to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 7. Divine Union. The sacred grove where the ancient ceremonies had been performed for countless generations lay hidden in the heart of the royal forest, protected by wards so old that only the most powerful bloodlines could even find its location. Tonight, under the full moon that painted everything in silver fire, it would witness something that had not occurred for over a century, the claiming of a moon-blessed queen. Freya stood at the edge of the circle of standing stones, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the preparations being made. The week following their confrontation with Lord Blackwater had seen the realm split cleanly in half, with some houses declaring for the High King while others rallied to the banner of rebellion. But tonight, politics and war seemed distant concerns compared to the ancient magic that thrummed through the sacred ground beneath her feet. "Are you ready?" Alaric's voice was soft as he approached, magnificent in the traditional ceremonial garments of his house. The black leather was worked with silver threads that caught the moonlight, and the crown on his head seemed to glow with its own inner fire. But it was his eyes that held her attention, golden and fierce with a love so intense it took her breath away. "I do not think anyone could be ready for this," she admitted, gesturing at the assembled witnesses. The grove was filled with representatives from every loyal house, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and anticipation as they prepared to witness history in the making. "I still feel like an imposter, like someone playing at being queen." "Then let me tell you what I see," Alaric said, taking her hands in his. "I see a woman who faced down corruption itself and cleansed it with her light. I see someone who has inspired loyalty in people who had forgotten what it meant to hope. I see the other half of my soul, the piece that has been missing my entire life." His words should have been reassuring, but Freya could not shake the feeling that they were balanced on a knife's edge, that one wrong word or gesture could send everything they had built crashing down around them. The reports from the borderlands grew darker each day, with Lord Blackwater's forces gathering strength and preparing for a war that would tear the realm apart. "Theron's army grows daily," she said, voicing the fear that had haunted her dreams. "Lords who should know better are flocking to his banner, convinced that you have grown weak, that I am some enchantment that has stolen your reason. Then they will learn otherwise when we face them on the battlefield," Alaric replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a born conqueror. "But tonight is not about war, Freya. Tonight is about us, about the bond that makes us stronger than any enemy we might face." Before she could respond, the sound of ancient horns echoed through the grove, their deep notes seeming to resonate in her very bones. The ceremony was beginning, and there would be no turning back from whatever they were about to unleash. The high priestess emerged from the shadows between the stones, her silver hair flowing like water around her shoulders, her ageless face marked by centuries of communion with forces beyond mortal understanding. In her hands, she carried a chalice that seemed to be carved from a single piece of moonstone, its surface glowing with inner fire. "We gather under the light of the full moon," her voice carried clearly through the grove, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, "to witness a bond blessed by the goddess herself. Let all who watch remember that what we do here tonight echoes through eternity." The ritual that followed was older than memory, its words spoken in the ancient tongue that predated human speech. Alaric and Freya knelt before the altar stone as the priestess called upon powers that had shaped the world in its earliest days, invoking blessings that had not been spoken for generations. But it was when the priestess called for the exchange of blood that Freya felt the true weight of what they were undertaking. This was not just a political alliance, or even a declaration of love. This was a merging of souls, a binding that would last beyond death itself. "By blood and moon and ancient right," the priestess intoned, drawing a silver blade across first Alaric's palm, then Freya's. "I bind these souls as one. What the goddess has joined, let no mortal power put asunder." Their blood mingled in the moonstone chalice, and immediately the grove was filled with power so intense it seemed to set the very air on fire. Freya gasped as the bond between them exploded into full awareness. Every emotion and sensation shared, every thought and feeling flowing between them like a river of liquid fire. Through their connection, she felt Alaric's absolute devotion, his fierce protectiveness, his willingness to face any danger to keep her safe. But she also felt something else. Something that made her understand for the first time the true scope of what they were creating together. She felt his wolf recognizing hers as not just mate, but as something more, something divine, something that carried the blessing of powers older than the stones beneath their feet. "Rise, Queen Freya," the priestess commanded, her voice carrying the authority of divine decree. "Rise, and claim your place beside your king." As Freya got to her feet, she felt the change that was taking place within her bloodline. The moon-blessed abilities that had been dormant for so long were awakening fully, responding to the completion of the ancient bond. Light poured from her skin like liquid silver, washing over the assembled witnesses and filling them with a sense of peace and rightness that some had not felt in years. But the ceremony was not yet complete. As tradition demanded, Alaric stepped forward to place the queen's crown upon her head, a circlet of silver and moonstone that had been crafted by the first moon-blessed rulers of their people. "With this crown, I name you my queen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the grove. "With this bond, I pledge my life, my strength, my very soul to your service. What I am because you make me whole." The words were not just ceremony. Through their bond, Freya could feel the truth of them resonating in his very essence, the absolute certainty with which he spoke them. This was not a man who made promises lightly, not a king who gave his word without meaning every syllable. "And with this bond," she replied, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, "I pledge my light to drive back the darkness, my strength to protect the innocent, my love to guide us both through whatever trials await." The moment the crown touched her head, the transformation was complete. Power flooded through Freya like a river bursting its banks, centuries of accumulated blessing and divine favor flowing into her transformed bloodline. She was no longer just moon-blessed. She was the Moon Queen, inheritor of abilities that had been lost to the world for generations. Around the grove, the witnesses fell to their knees as one, their wolves recognizing the divine authority that now radiated from their new queen. Even the most hardened warriors among them felt tears streaming down their faces as they basked in the presence of something they had never expected to see in their lifetimes. But it was the moment when Alaric took her in his arms, when their lips met in the kiss that sealed their bond forever, that the true magic was unleashed. Light exploded from their joined forms, washing over the sacred grove and beyond, racing through the forest like wildfire carried on wings of pure power. In villages throughout the loyal territories, people stepped from their homes to stare in wonder at the silver glow that painted the horizon. Sick children found themselves miraculously healed, old wounds closed without scars, and hearts that had been heavy with despair suddenly lifted with inexplicable hope. But the light did not stop at the borders of friendly lands. It swept through the rebel camps as well, and wherever it touched, corruption withered and died. Dark bargains made in desperation crumbled like sand, leaving behind confused and frightened men who suddenly remembered what it felt like to be whole. Lord Blackwater himself, standing in his command tent as he planned the assault that would begin his war against the crown, staggered as the light swept over him. The darkness that had been growing in his heart, fed by years of bitter ambition and resentment, simply ceased to exist. For the first time in decades, he saw clearly what he had become, what he had been prepared to do in his hunger for power. "My lord?" one of his captains asked, concern clear in his voice as his commander fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Send word to all our forces," Blackwater said, his voice breaking with emotion. "The war is over. We ride for the capital at first light to swear fealty to our rightful queen." Similar scenes played out across the realm as the Moon Queen's light touched hearts that had been closed to hope, as her power cleansed corruption that had taken root in the darkest corners of their world. By dawn, the rebellion that had threatened to tear the kingdom apart had simply melted away. leaving behind only grateful subjects who remembered what it meant to serve something greater than their own ambition. In the sacred grove, as the ceremony reached its conclusion and the witnesses began to disperse, Freya found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. She was queen now, not just in title but in truth, blessed with abilities that could reshape the very foundations of their society. "How do you feel?" Alaric asked softly as they walked hand in hand through the moonlit forest, heading back toward the castle that was now truly their home. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also complete. For the first time in my life, I feel like I know exactly who I am supposed to be." "And who is that?" Freya smiled, feeling the weight of the crown on her head, the power flowing through her veins, the absolute certainty of their bond singing in her heart. "Your queen," she said simply. "Your mate. Your equal. The mother of the children who will inherit a kingdom purified by light and bound by love rather than fear." Alaric's answering smile was radiant with joy and fierce pride. "Then let us go home, my queen, and begin building the world our children deserve." As they walked through the forest together, the moon blessing their path with silver light, Freya knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. There would be challenges to face, enemies to overcome, a kingdom to rebuild from the ashes of corruption and fear. But they would face it all together, bound by love and blessed by powers older than memory. The Moon Queen had returned to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 8. Legacy of Light. 8 months had passed since the night that would be remembered in the histories as the Great Cleansing, when the light of the Moon Queen had swept across the realm and purified a kingdom that had been slowly dying from corruption and despair. Now, as autumn painted the ancient forests in shades of gold and crimson, Queen Freya stood on the highest balcony of Drakmore Castle, her hands resting on the gentle swell of her belly, where the future of their bloodline grew strong. "The eastern provinces report another exceptional harvest," Alaric said as he joined her in the crisp morning air, his arms sliding around her from behind with the comfortable intimacy of mates who had found perfect harmony. "Lord Blackwater writes that his people are calling it the blessing of the Moon Queen, crops yielding twice what they produced in previous years." Freya leaned back against his chest, marveling at how completely her life had changed from that terrified girl who had thought herself cursed and worthless. The crown that had once felt impossibly heavy now rested as naturally as her own hair, the responsibilities of queenship flowing through her as easily as breathing. "And the reports from the border territories?" she asked, though she could already sense the answer through their bond. The connection between them had only grown stronger with time, until sometimes she wondered where she ended and he began. "3 more packs have requested to join the kingdom," he replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a ruler who had seen his greatest dreams realized. "They speak of the peace that has settled over our lands, the way conflicts that have festered for generations are simply resolving themselves. Your influence spreads further each day, my love." It was true, though Freya still sometimes marveled at the scope of what had been unleashed that night in the sacred grove. The moon-blessed power that flowed through her had done more than simply cleanse corruption from individuals. It had begun to heal the very foundations of their society, inspiring a level of cooperation and mutual respect that had not been seen in living memory. Villages that had feuded for centuries over water rights were now working together to build irrigation systems that benefited everyone. Noble houses that had nursed ancient grievances were finding ways to resolve their differences through negotiation rather than bloodshed. Even the most hardened criminals seemed to lose their taste for violence when exposed to the gentle influence of her power. "Sometimes I wonder if this is all real," she murmured, watching as a group of children played in the castle courtyard below, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "If I will wake up tomorrow to find myself back in my chambers at Rosehaven, still wolfless, still broken." "Then let me remind you," Alaric said, turning her in his arms so that she faced him. The love in his golden eyes was so intense it still took her breath away, even after all these months of marriage. "You are Queen Freya Draven, the moon-blessed sovereign of the greatest kingdom our people have ever known. You are carrying the heir to a dynasty that will rule for 1,000 years. You are the other half of my soul, the woman who saved me from a lifetime of darkness." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across cheekbones that no longer seemed sharp with hunger and despair. The girl who had been mocked and dismissed had grown into a woman of power and grace, her inner light making her beautiful in ways that transcended mere physical appearance. "And you," she replied, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw, "are the man who saw what I could become when I could not see it myself. The king who chose love over duty and found that love made his duty sacred." Their kiss was soft and sweet, filled with the deep contentment of souls who had found their perfect match. But it was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and they turned to see Helena hurrying toward them with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Your Majesties," the older woman said, dropping into a curtsy that was more formality than necessity after all these months of service. "Forgive the intrusion, but Lord Theron has arrived with urgent news from the capital." Freya and Alaric exchanged glances. Theron Blackwater had become one of their most trusted advisors in the months since his dramatic change of heart, his experience and political acumen invaluable in the delicate work of rebuilding their kingdom's foundations. They found him waiting in the small council chamber, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that suggested momentous news. Beside him stood Lady Evangeline, who had surprised everyone by becoming one of Freya's closest friends and confidants, her political marriage having been replaced by something much more valuable, a genuine partnership in service to the crown. "Your Majesties," Theron said, rising as they entered, "I bring word from the southern kingdoms. King Aldrich of Valenhall requests a formal audience. It seems the stories of our transformation have reached even the human territories." "What does he want?" Alaric asked, settling into his chair with the fluid grace that never failed to remind Freya of the powerful wolf that lived beneath his human facade. "Trade agreements, primarily," Evangeline answered, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her invaluable as an advisor. "But also something more. He speaks of troubles in his own lands, corruption among his nobles, darkness taking root in places where it should not be able to flourish." Freya felt a familiar stirring within her chest. The moon-blessed power recognizing a call to its true purpose. "He wants me to cleanse his kingdom as well." "The request was not made directly," Theron admitted, but the implication was clear. "Word has spread far beyond our borders about the miraculous changes that have occurred here. There are those who wonder if such blessings might be shared with other lands, other peoples who suffer under the weight of corruption and despair." The prospect both thrilled and terrified Freya. She had always known that her abilities were meant for more than just their own kingdom, but the thought of expanding their influence beyond their traditional borders was daunting. "What do you think?" she asked Alaric, trusting his political instincts as much as she trusted his love. "I think," he said slowly, his golden eyes thoughtful, "that the goddess did not bless you with such power simply to keep it confined within our borders. If there are people suffering, if there are lands that could benefit from your light, then perhaps it is our duty to share what we have been given. It would mean travel," Evangeline pointed out practically. "Extended absences from the kingdom, especially challenging given your condition." She gestured delicately toward Freya's pregnancy. "Not necessarily," Freya replied, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "My power has grown stronger since the bonding ceremony. I have been practicing extending my influence without physical presence, channeling the light through willing conduits." She looked at Theron meaningfully. "You have felt it yourself, have you not? The way the cleansing continues to spread through you to others, even when I am not present?" Theron nodded slowly. "My own lands prosper beyond anything we have seen before. My people speak of dreams filled with silver light, of waking with hearts lighter than they have felt in years. If you could teach others to carry that blessing, an order of moon-blessed carriers," Alaric said, his voice carrying the excitement of a man glimpsing new possibilities. "Trusted individuals who could travel to distant lands, carrying your light to places you cannot personally visit." The conversation that followed lasted well into the afternoon, mapping out the possibilities of a future where the moon-blessed influence could spread far beyond the borders of their kingdom. It was an intoxicating vision, a world where corruption could not take root, where conflicts resolved themselves through understanding rather than violence, where the darkness that had plagued their peoples for generations could finally be driven back. As evening approached and their advisors departed to begin the complex work of turning vision into reality, Freya found herself once again on the balcony, watching the sun set over lands that had been transformed by forces she still sometimes struggled to believe she possessed. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, as Alaric joined her, his presence as comforting as always. "The choice to claim me instead of accepting the political marriage? The chaos we caused? The war that almost was? Never," he replied without hesitation, his arms encircling her as their child stirred within her womb. "Look at what we have built together, Freya. Look at what our love has created. A kingdom at peace, a people united by hope, rather than divided by fear, a future where our children will inherit something worthy of their divine bloodline." As if responding to his voice, the baby kicked strongly, and Freya gasped at the sensation. Through their bond, she felt Alaric's wonder at the life they had created together. The heir who would carry both royal strength and moon-blessed wisdom into a new generation. "Our daughter will be extraordinary," she said, somehow certain of the child's gender. "She will inherit abilities that even I cannot fully comprehend, powers that will let her reshape the world in ways we can only imagine. And our son as well," Alaric added, his hand joining hers on her belly. "For the healers confirm what our wolves have long known. We carry twins, my love, the future king and queen of a dynasty that will endure for millennia." The revelation filled Freya with a joy so intense it threatened to overwhelm her. Twins, one to inherit the throne, and one to carry the moon-blessed bloodline into the future. The goddess had blessed them beyond their wildest dreams. As full darkness fell over the kingdom, and the first stars appeared in the clear autumn sky, Freya felt a deep sense of completion settling into her bones. She was no longer the broken girl who had thought herself worthless, no longer the woman who had kissed a stranger in desperation. She was queen, mate, mother-to-be, the living embodiment of divine blessing made manifest in the mortal world. "I love you," she whispered against Alaric's lips as he drew her into another kiss. "And I love you," he replied, his voice carrying the same absolute certainty that had made him a king. "My queen, my mate, the light of my life and the mother of our legacy." Below them, their kingdom slept in perfect peace, protected by love and blessed by power older than memory, and in the distance, carried on winds that stretched across continents, the silver light of the Moon Queen continued to spread, bringing hope to places that had forgotten what it meant to dream of something better. The girl who had been mocked for kissing the poorest man at the mating ceremony had become the most powerful queen in the known world, and her greatest adventures were only just beginning. In the royal gardens, night-blooming flowers opened to catch the moonlight, their petals glowing with the same silver radiance that marked everything touched by divine blessing. The moon-blessed had returned to the world, and the world would never be the same. Their love story had become legend, their kingdom a beacon of hope in a world too long dominated by darkness. And as the moon reached its zenith overhead, blessing all who dwelt within its light, the future stretched before them bright with infinite possibility. This was only the beginning of their tale, the first chapter in a story that would echo through the ages, inspiring lovers and dreamers for generations yet unborn. The Moon Queen and her Iron King had claimed their destiny, and nothing in heaven or earth would ever tear them apart.